I'm going to give if you don't mind, can I give a 2-minute history on your street corner?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. It's always fun to have kind of context, and we have this, the downtown area is pretty well documented. So I thought, in case anyone's not from the Verona area, we're going to be talking about the main intersection here of Verona Avenue and Main Street. There's Kismet, there's the Walgreens drugstore, and Eagles Nest used to be there, there's the bank. This is where the original building we're going to be talking about it is. If we go back the farthest we can, 1861, our first plat map in Verona that actually has structures and things on it. We have something from the 1830s, but it's all just terrain. If we go back to 1861, we can see this was owned by a Flick, who was the brother of the woman who married Josiah Matz of the Matz House. This was their in-laws across the street. There's this BLSS, which stands for Blacksmith Shop. There's a blacksmith shop there on that corner. If we skip ahead a little over a decade to 1873, now this is owned by Schumann. Schumann is still a blacksmith shop, and that was there for quite a while, and it shows up in a lot of our Verona history books. Ken Benke found a picture of this in his 1972 book. It's a little blurry, but this is the Schumann blacksmith shop that was right there, right about where the end of Walgreens parking lot would be as you head west. Then in 1894, someone drew out a map of our downtown. We get a little bit more detail of that area. Here's that corner. Walgreens would be like right here, parking lot there. Blacksmith shop's still present. 1911, still owned by Schumann. You can see more details showing up around it. And 1935, this picture that Ernie Johnson owned, that Ken scanned, of that corner. So Walgreens would be like right about here. Their parking lot would be right about to here. This is the house we're going to be talking a lot about today. That's Ernie on the porch. I didn't realize that until I was told that last year. He supplies this photo, and he's actually in it. And there's the garage and stuff that became the Niglis implement later. Skip ahead to this picture. This was in Doc Sharp's personal photo album. Still exists. Someone saved that when his house got sold. This is a picture across from the Sharp house, which is where the bank is, of that same building when it was still a house. And if you blow this up, it's Valley View School. So he took a picture of this. Isn't that cool? Super. He took a lot of photographs. He's not in most of them because he took them, but he's in a few of them. I don't know the year on this one. But in 1941, Bill Koosman Jr., who we lost last year, told me about his parents moving from over where Gucci Pucci and the wine bar is now to that same house. This is the last time it looked like this. They did a big renovation in 1941 that brought it up to, I think, how you would recognize it when your family was there. There's one of those little tiny baby Crosley cars in the front. But this is 1947. This was Alice Koosman's book, and it says Koosman Food Store, if you can read right there. So kind of cool to track this building. Now as we jump forward, this is where I'm going to turn it over, because now it kind of looks like we remember it. And Gary, if you want to come up, I'll grab, would you like a podium? Would you like to introduce us to your mom if we haven't met her before?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just going to slide this podium up here if you don't want to.
Of course.
Get closer to Mom.
We want to stay out from underneath that speaker. It'll make it fade.
Oh, okay.
Put you right over here. And I'm going to actually change the lights. And I do have, if you want to show pictures during, at the end, whatever, I have about 7 or 8 pictures of the history of your building too. So just let me know when.
Besides these?
In addition.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
I dug some up late last night. Okay. So a couple extra pictures here. This is from 1966. Ron at the library scanned it. There's the Verona Drugs in the background.
Okay.
What I love about this picture is the guys underneath the scooper, the whole baseball caps, the guy watching hard hat. Baseball cap, hard hat. That made me laugh. So they're doing street widening here in '66.
Okay.
In front of your
So
store.
at this point in
Oh, here,
time,
use the mic. Yeah.
So at this point in time, I think in '66, the stairs leading into the building still would have been in the center of the store. So this was one of, I'm not sure how many times the road was widened, but you can see there was Verona Avenue used to be a tree-lined street. And when I was little, I would have been little in '66, I just remember walking outside one day and there were ribbons wrapped around those trees. And I didn't know much, but I knew that ribbons, even as young as I was, ribbons wrapped around a tree wasn't going to be a good thing. And they ended up taking a bunch of those trees out when they widened the street. It used to be just a beautiful tree-lined street. But the stairs leading into the store were still in the center. So people sometimes ask, people who knew something about how to lay out a pharmacy would often wonder, why is it laid out the way it was? Because when Mom and Dad came, the stairs were in the center, so you entered into the middle of the store. By the time I became aware of it, we were entering in the side of the store, because the next time they widened the road, they basically came so close to the front of the building that the stairs had to go. So, yep. So, stairs in the center, right? No additional structure on the side. So, and great big trees. So I never really remember, okay, so now, in 1972, the stairs in the center are gone because the street got widened again. This part was added over here, so now we're entering on the far right-hand side of the building. And that's why we never really got the layout changed, but it was always designed to enter in the center of the store.
Is that your car?
No, no, wish that had been my car. Eh? Oh, Lord. Oh, boy. Okay, so let's start here. Let's, okay, so we're gonna start here. So my name is Gary Bonke, and I'm here because Mom came here in 1958 with my dad, Don, who we've lost. So Mom and Dad had a pharmacy on Lakeside Street. I think it was just called Lakeside Pharmacy. Dad graduated from pharmacy school in 1950, right? So his mom and dad had actually bought that place before he graduated from pharmacy school, with the idea that he would run it as a pharmacy once he got out of pharmacy school, which Dad always said was a bit of a stress on him because they already had the store, but no pharmacy. So in 1950, they were on Lakeside Street in a pharmacy. So one of the drug salesmen came in, said to my dad, there were doctors in Verona. At that point in time, they were in a little Quonset hut. And they said, they need a pharmacy in Verona. So the drug salesman said, you gotta go west, young man.
We were also afraid that Renabounce was closing in.
Yeah.
Test. I'm glad, hold on, sorry. Is this might be too close to the speaker. Too close, right?
I don't
If
know,
ever
we'll
talk
find
to you-
out.
Let's test. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a second microphone.
I don't want one, thank you.
Oh, just put it like right there. If it feeds back, I'll take it right here. Just try saying something there. What were you gonna say? Well, first, can you introduce yourself?
Oh, well, I think I've already been in.
Okay, I'm gonna give up on this one, sorry.
You just talk loud, you got a big voice.
I do. I think he's saying I've got a big mouth, is what he's saying. And wait till I get him home. But seriously, Renabounce was coming all over. They were really coming out. And that's what, also what the drug salesman said was, you guys need to get out of here while you still can.
Yeah.
And it was Associated Physicians who had the Quonset hut next door. And my kids will tell you, I was big on, when they get bitten by something, we go over and have a shot of.
Tetanus shot.
Oh, tetanus shots. I was famous for that. My,
We had more tetanus shots than any kids, I think, in history. History. So now, we always got a tetanus shot, no matter what we got scraped by. You know, we got a tetanus shot. So my grandma Bonke is taking care of me one day, and out behind where, I think, kind of in that, where the blacksmith shop used to be, I fell into a pile of rusty barbed wire. And my grandma Bonke she was English, and literally, it was just a scratch in her opinion, so we didn't go get a tetanus shot that day.
I never heard about that.
Yeah.
This is the first time I'm hearing about that.
But, you know, Mom's right. Renabounce, they didn't start out really as a chain. They just started out as a series of neighborhood pharmacies. And Oscar Renabaum was a stand-up guy.
He was a nice guy.
Yeah, he was really a stand-up guy. My dad always said that, Renabaum's competed with you based on service, not price. And unfortunately, to some degree, when Renabaum's had, when he decided he needed to sell, he had grown too big really for anybody but an honest to goodness chain to take him over. Along came Corky Walgreens, bought out Renabaum's, and then, you know, Walgreens is a different kettle of fish for
Definitely
sure.
not, gentlemen.
Yeah, different fish for sure. So we came to Verona in 1958, and that had been Kunzman's grocery store, and they got it remodeled, and it became Verona Pharmacy. So at first it was just Dad, and he worked all the hours that it was open. I think it was open from 8 in the morning till 8 at night, and
We lived above the drugstore, me and 3 kids.
yeah, we lived above the store. It was a
Lot of
3-bedroom
stairs.
apartment up there. So, so Dad was by himself there for a couple of years running the show. And eventually he realized that wasn't gonna work. So he brought a partner on board, Bob Scheinman, Robert Scheinman, who a lot of you guys would remember. And he had met Bob in pharmacy school. So if we jump ahead to the next slide, the one with all the people. Yep, there's Robert, lower left-hand corner. So then it was basically Dad and Bob for the longest time. And, you know, when Dad came here in 1950, or in 58, I was like 3 months old. And, you know, pharmacy in 1958 was no computers, no generic drugs. All the records were kept on.
Penicillin and sulfa, that's what you dispensed.
Right.
That was it.
You know, all of the pharmaceuticals that he would have had at that time would have fit in a couple of kitchen cabinets. There just wasn't much to be had. An awful lot of his business was compounding at that time. There weren't really that many prepared dosage forms. Great big drug companies hadn't really gotten rolling the way they are now. There was certainly there. So he and Bob, you know, had the store and kept going. And, you know, most of the people you see here, my sister Pam, you would know her upper right-hand corner. She's a pharmacist also. So pharmacy kind of continued. I sort of became involved really in the business when I was in high school, because I would go down there at night, and Dad, at that time, all the prescriptions were kept in file folders. So if you came in to get a prescription filled, you would hand Dad the bottle, and he would put the pills in the bottle and hand type a label up for the next fill. And you paid cash because there were no insurance. There was no insurance at that time at all. So everybody paid cash, which is why people that owned their own pharmacy at that point in time were some of the wealthiest people around, because everybody paid cash. So then after you left, he would go and he would find your paper file in a file folder. He would pull that card out, he'd roll it into the typewriter, and he would type the date and all the information that had to do with that transaction. And then he would put the card back into the file. So if your card got lost, you were lost. So I would come down after school, and Dad would have, the place was just covered in these file cards because he had fallen behind and he needed to get caught up. And I kept saying to him, Dad, you know, I can type, I can do this. But, you know, something you should know about my dad, the fact that he and Mom got out here in 1958 is kind of a miracle, because my dad is not a guy that likes change. He is not a bold mover, you know, and shaker. So the fact that he got here at all is kind of amazing. And he just didn't let me in to help for the longest time. I think one day he was just so tired and so far behind that he finally said, okay, go ahead and give it a try. And of course, being smarter than the average bear, I figured this out pretty quick. So that's really how I became involved in helping Dad, and really my future as a pharmacist really started there. There were no pharmacy technicians. You know, that formal title, the pharmacy technicians we know today who are just critical to the operation of any pharmacy, that just didn't exist. What you had was maybe a cashier, and, you know, maybe the cashier would help out once in a while. Mom talks about, you know, the doctor calling the apartment and saying so-and-so needed penicillin. If Dad was gone someplace, Mom would just go down, you know, get the prescription filled, patient would come, you'd hand that off.
But
And-
Don always checked it. I just left it there because, you know, but the doctors really did allow me to take a prescription on the phone back then. You know, and I would take the prescription and I would put the stuff in and I'd leave it there and then I'd go back upstairs. And they don't do that anymore.
Yeah, we don't do that. And obviously, the fact that we lived upstairs, it meant that everybody in town knew Dad and Mom and all of us lived upstairs.
Jeez, yeah.
So we always tell the story of Christmas, every Christmas. At some point in time, somebody would realize they had forgotten their flash cubes or their film. So the phone would ring, and it would be somebody saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot my flash cubes." And so Dad would go downstairs and open up, and we would sell flash cubes and film on Christmas, which was no big deal because we just lived upstairs.
Yeah, seriously.
So Dad and Bob ran the store, and then when I got out of pharmacy school in 1981, my sister Pam was up in Manitowoc working. So when I got out of pharmacy school in 1981, Bob Scheinman was ready to retire. So Bob sold me his share of the pharmacy, and so then it became Dad and I from 1981. So keep in mind, in 1981, there were still no generic drugs. When I got out of pharmacy school, there were no generic drugs. We were still typing everything into those same file cards. When you walked in the door, you know, here I am wet behind the ears, but we still did it exactly the same way that we were doing it in 1958, except the typewriter was electric. That was really the only change there was. So, you know, Dad and I set to work, and again, things didn't really change that much until the advent of computer software, because again, in 1981, by that time, there were maybe 3 insurance companies. There was WPS and Wisconsin Medicaid, and I'm not sure who the other one was. All of it was submitted on paper, all handwritten forms, press hard, because your carbon paper was making 3 copies. And so when you left the building, if you had WPS insurance, we would write that claim up, and you had multiple claims on one piece of paper, and whenever you got the form filled up, you just sent it off and got paid. So keep in mind, in 1981, we got paid what was called average wholesale price plus some $3 fee or something. But average wholesale price was a very generous reimbursement in those days. So, you know, Verona Pharmacy was still a very profitable operation, even though when Dad came out in 1958, when he first opened, I suspect he probably filled 20 to 25 scripts a day.
It was pretty slow.
Somewhere in there. You know, we now fill 20 to 25 scripts an hour. You know, and all of that is because when computers came along, then the speed could really pick up. But when I got out in 1981, we were still a couple of years away from installing a computer. So we're just poking along, filling scripts by hand and typing. And there were, you know, there was no voicemail. So you answered the phone. All the prescriptions came in by phone. Nothing came in, there was no email yet, so everything came in by phone. So we went along. So then in 1984, I think it was the start of generic drugs. So that was the first time we really saw generic drugs. It was in 1984. And Dad, who had gotten really tired of one of the brand name drug salesmen, the Park Davis guy, because he made more money than everybody, Dad said to him, "See, now you guys are going to get yours. Now we're going to have generic drugs." And the Park Davis guy looked at my dad and said, "If you think that generic drugs are going to make any difference to us, you're wrong." He said, "Generic drugs in the end won't make any difference to anything." And really, he's been shown to be right. The cost of healthcare has continued to go up. Brand name drug companies haven't lost a dime. The generic companies, most of them are now owned by brand name drug companies, so things really haven't changed as much. But in those days, we thought generic drugs were really, really going to make a difference. So, and there were only 2 or 3 companies that made generic drugs. So my sister Pam comes down from Manitowoc to live in Verona. And so she came to work at the store. So I believe it was in maybe 1984, somewhere in there. we decided that we needed to install a computer system at the store. We were gonna go computers. Well, my dad had no interest in installing a computer. He absolutely, you talk about hit the ball and drag Fred. We dragged Fred every step of the way in installing a computer. Pam and I sat down there at night when we finally got our Etterby computer system. We paid, I believe, $12,000 for the first computer. It was a single tower. It had a 286 megahertz processor in it. Like I say, we paid $12,000 for it. And Pam and I sat down there at night and loaded all of those cards into that computer. Along with all of the prescription drugs, everything got loaded in that computer. We worked day and night to get all that stuff loaded in. But the beauty of this was, my dad has a tendency to adopt ideas once they are shown to be a good idea. So it came the day that we rolled the computer system out, and when you came in to get a prescription filled, instead of pulling your file card, we went to the computer, pull up your name, found the refill for whatever medication it was, and we hit finish. And next to us was our label printer, and it printed the label that went on the bottle and stored that data in the computer. And if we had invented fire in front of my dad, at that moment in time, he could not have been more gobsmacked. And of course, then it became the best idea Dad ever had. Because we filled, I mean, previous to that, the three of us worked really hard to keep up with the pace. By then, we're probably filling 50 scripts a day, all manually. And you could fill 50 prescriptions easily with this brand new computer system. So now we're in the computer age. Pam is on board. And so we go merrily along. So then, really, the next, so then, here's a game changer. When my son was born in 1992, my priorities changed. I decided I don't want to spend the rest of my life down here working in the pharmacy while Nate grows up. So we decided to move up to Ironwood, Michigan and work for Kmart. So Pam bought my share out. A partner that she had bought Dad's share out. And then, so the ownerships changed. Dad, for the first time, was not an owner, but of course he was always there anyway. And I moved to Ironwood, Michigan to work for Kmart Pharmacy. Truly one of the dumbest moves I ever made, because I thought my life was going to get simpler. It turns out that Kmart Pharmacy in Ironwood, Michigan filled more prescriptions per day than any pharmacy in the state of Wisconsin, and there was one in the state of Michigan busier than we were. It was absolutely the most brutal place to work you could ever imagine. We worked 12 hours a day. There was certainly no time to eat because you were busy from the start. So I lasted like 2.5 years up there. And just about the time I was going to have a nervous breakdown, Pam decided that she and her partner weren't going to make long-term partners. So I came back down and went to work for Pam. So I never bought back in, I'm just working for my sister. So, because that was the natural order of things, because Pam is bossy. So it really made more sense for her to own the joint. So now it's Pam, sole owner. I'm working for her. Dad's doing all the bookwork. And so we go along. And then came the big change in 1997. In 1997, the old store burned. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm coming back into town. I've been out of town for a day. And the whole intersection was blocked off, and there was every fire truck in the world there. And I thought to myself, geez, that looks really close to the store. And sure enough, it was really close to the store. And so in 1997, Verona Pharmacy was gone. So luckily, the people that lived upstairs, there was a couple living upstairs with a cat, and they got out okay. But just as they got out, the front windows blew out. And so here's the story of the fire, for those of you who haven't heard it. Our bookkeeper worked in the back, always had a space heater underneath her desk to keep her feet warm. So one of the girls that worked up front was cold that day, so she brought the space heater up and put it up in the front corner of the store where the counter was at that time. And it was one of those that had a thermostat on it, so it would go off once the area was warm enough and you wouldn't even know it was there. So, and then there was a box that was supposed to be picked up, I think by FedEx or UPS, and that box for some reason didn't get picked up that day. So now you have a space heater in a box. So when they closed up on Saturday, there was a setback thermostat on the furnace, and it was set to turn the furnace down once you were done working for the day. So the furnace shuts down, the building gets cold, the space heater turns on, the box is there, and the fire starts. And every fireman that had ever done an inspection there said, if this place ever catches fire, there will be no putting it out. It'll go. And they were right, because it had been added on to, and so there were lots of chaseways where if the fire got into the chaseways, they wouldn't be able to get it out. So the entire floor, and then it got up into the attic space, and you can see it's a goner. Luckily, the couple got out. They found the cat later under the bed. Cat made it. It just, the important thing about the computer that was Dad's best idea was the computer terminal was under the counter below the pharmacy counter. In the old days, the paper files would have been on top of the counter and they never would have survived the fire. They would have been gone. The computer, luckily, was underneath. So when we went in later, after they had, gotten the fire out and it was cool, you could see that everything from basically your waist down mostly survived. The farther up you got, the worse things got. To the point where, prescription bottles up here were just melted right into the counter, right into the cabinet. So everything above head high was gone, but the computer survived. So the computer guys were able to pull a hard drive off, and basically Verona Pharmacy still existed on that hard drive. So the building is gone, but the pharmacy itself is intact in the hard drive. So we're standing across the street in the Hardee's parking lot, and my sister Pam is devastated, and Carl Miller, bless his heart, had his arm around my sister's shoulder and said, as soon as the fire department gets this knocked down, we'll get it boarded up, and we'll start clearing out the space in the old Miller store. So where Hometown Pharmacy is now used to be Miller's grocery store. And so that's what they did. So the Miller family basically made that space available. If that space hadn't been available, we really would have been in trouble. So here is where the people of the city of Verona came to the rescue. Because the building is gone, but the hard drive exists. So we basically went to my sister Pam's house. The telephone company was able to recover the telephone system out of the basement. So they basically screwed the telephone system into the side of my sister Pam's house on Harriet Street. And we had the computer restored on a hard drive there. And we were hoping we could kind of run a pharmacy out of my sister Pam's house. But the pharmacy examining board, who is as humorless a bunch of people as you'd ever want to meet in your life.
True, very true.
Yeah, said no, couldn't be done. For a whole bunch of reasons, it wouldn't have made any sense that anybody, just couldn't be done. So then here's what we did. Lots of customers said, look, you guys don't worry, we're gonna get our prescriptions filled someplace else, but we'll come back as soon as you reopen. But what we mostly did was we transferred all of our prescriptions out to other pharmacies. Roberts in New Glarus, Malott's Pharmacy, there was a pharmacy over in Middleton.
Belleville?
Yep, Belleville Pharmacy. And they basically filled our prescriptions. We went down to pick them up and delivered them. And that's how we ran the pharmacy. And now, well, that's untrue. There's still enough camaraderie in pharmacy that could still happen today where somebody wouldn't grab your patients. But those pharmacies, that wasn't even ever a thought in their head. They were simply thinking, what happens if that's our pharmacy in ruins? What would we do? So what they did was help us out. So they filled all our prescriptions, and when we got reopened in the space that Hometown Pharmacy is now, I don't think we ever lost anybody. We rebuilt, the files, we updated everything. Carl Miller cleared the space out in record time. And we reopened as Hometown Pharmacy. But here's the other critical thing. The consequence of that 1997 fire was that that piece of property is now vacant. Because the city had told us a long time ago that this building was grandfathered in,
Yeah.
but it could never be rebuilt there because it would be non-conforming. You wouldn't have enough setback. At that time, you need a certain amount of setback. Clearly, we don't do setback anymore. Clearly. But at that time, that was a non-conforming building. So there was no way to rebuild there. So the critical thing is that space now becomes vacant. And other properties on that corner who were owned by Betty
Mickey?
Rotar.
Oh, Rotar, Ben
Thank you.
Rotar, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
She owned a big chunk of that corner. So she was kind of assembling those properties and was looking for a buyer. But you couldn't really assemble a property very well as long as we were there because we had enough of a triangular chunk of it that it wouldn't work out. But once we were gone, then it would. So, so we got opened as Hometown Pharmacy, and so we're moving forward. So then, Walgreens comes a calling. And you sort of have to understand that my sister Pam still owns the whole business at that point. And she made a really, really difficult decision to sell those files to Walgreens. Because at that point in time, pharmacy was really in trouble. It was very hard to make a living as an independent pharmacy. There wasn't the kind of cooperatives that you see now. And if Walgreens came and located in Verona, they were probably going to bleed you to death. So she made the choice to sell to Walgreens. And I can tell you that that was a really hard decision. That was certainly not something she came to lightly. She knew the consequences. But the idea is that we were all going to go to work for Walgreens. So we're going to, Verona Pharmacy was going to cease to exist, and we were all going to go to work at Walgreens, and it was going to be just like the old days. So Walgreens comes, they build on that property. Their driveway is basically where that store used to be. And in 2004, August, I think,
Yeah.
was the last day of Verona Pharmacy. So at that point in time, sort of the bonding connection, actually ownership in the store ended on August of 2004. So I'm still thinking I'm going to go to work for Walgreens. So along comes the Walgreens district manager who says, I'm really sorry, we can't have you and your sister in the same store. It violates Walgreens corporate policy. It can't have family in there. So now I don't have any place to work. So I heard about a group called the MD Group, and I thought it was like medical doctor group. I assumed it was a couple of doctors and owned some pharmacies. And I thought, well, I'll just go to work for them. I'll be a float guy. So it turns out that the M was Matt Mabey, and the D was Dan Strauss. So, and they at that point in time owned 4 stores, 4 pharmacies. And that came into existence because they played ball together. And Matt Mabey had just got out of pharmacy school and was working in DeForest, and he wanted to buy that store, but he didn't have enough money. Well, Dan Strauss was a very successful CPA, so not only did Dan have money, but he had investors who needed a place to park money. So Matt and Dan got together and bought the DeForest store, and Dan, being a forward-looking guy, immediately realized that there was other opportunities. So MD Group then bought the store in Oregon, and I think the store in Belleville. So when I interviewed with Dan Strauss down in New Glarus, they had just purchased Robert's Pharmacy in New Glarus, and we're just converting that store to a hometown store. And I just assumed I would work for them. And Dan said, well, what do you think about reopening a pharmacy in Verona? And I said, well, if you're game, I'm game. So basically, then we went right back into the same space that was Verona Pharmacy at that time, and we reopened as Hometown Pharmacy. We were the first store to open from scratch. All the other stores have been existing stores and open. So, yep, here we are. So we gave Walgreens a 3 or 4 month head start. And this is where corporations slay me. They knew what they had when they bought the files from my sister Pam. They knew how many scripts they were going to fill, and they had the most valuable resource, which was my sister Pam. She was the link. She was what was going to make this work. Because let's face it, if people that lived in Verona had wanted to go to Walgreens, they could have went to Walgreens years ago. There were all kinds of Walgreens stores, but they didn't. They stayed with us. So they had the link, and what they did was ignored that link, and they stuck her in the pharmacy, someplace where she couldn't be seen, and then there was just basically, it was never staffed correctly. So they were completely overworked, completely unprepared for this opening, and so you would go there to get your prescription filled, and some shell-shocked looking person would say, you know, who are you? And you'd say, well, I'm here to get my prescription. And they would go, well, it's not ready, come back in an hour. You would come back an hour and a half later, and it wasn't any closer to being done then than it was an hour and a half ago. It was a disastrous opening. So, but that opened the door for us, because as soon as people realized that we were going to reopen a store there, so at that point in time, my sister can't have anything to do with us because she's contractually obligated, right? So Mom was there, we were painting and sort of getting the place ready to go, and people would come in the door and say, please, as soon as you're open, transfer all my prescriptions from Walgreens. I'm going to come back here. And of course, it didn't hurt that I've been here for a really long time. Mom was there, you know, and a technician that had formerly worked at the old store, Diane McGregor, came with me to this location. So once we were open, believe it or not, we transferred 90 prescriptions a day out of that Walgreens location for 3 straight months. Sure is. And Diane and I sat there, and we worked endless hours getting all this data rebuilt in, because now we're starting from scratch. We have to rebuild. We have a computer, but we have no data. We don't know your name, address, telephone number. We don't know anything about insurance, and by now insurance is a big deal. So we transferred so many prescriptions out of there that they started sending Walgreens guys, corporate guys, and they would walk back and forth in front of the windows and look in the window. And you could tell them, because they all wore the same kind of suits. And they'd be walking past, looking in the window like we were giving away money or something. I don't know what they thought. So that went on for a couple of weeks. And finally, the store manager at Walgreens, who was a super nice guy, called me and said, Gary, do you have any idea how much longer this is going to go on? Because he said, I'm catching a lot of grief from on top about this. And I said, Hugh, I'm sorry, I just really don't know. So anyway, we basically built that business back because Walgreens didn't know what they had, simply ignored everything. So that sort of kind of brings us up to today. You know, lots of people have come and gone, have worked there, made huge contributions, been lifelong friends. You've met a lot of them, and I can't even tell you how important all of you are. The fact that you keep coming through the door, day after day, month after month, year after year. You know, we've grown old together. You know, we've lost lots of friends. You know, we've had lots of people pass away, but we've met lots of kids and grandkids. And, you know, we just keep going along. So now, I'm starting to slow down a little bit. I worked like 70 hours a week for a couple of straight years, and I can tell you that's just hard to do. You miss a lot of things. You're not there for a lot of stuff. So our newest pharmacist here, Abby Milsky, is now graduated. She's the pharmacist in charge there now, so I technically work for her. And that's okay. I've always been a better leader than a follower, so that works. So I turn 65 next year, so I'll start slowly fading away. And that kind of brings us up to today.
Does Nate?
A lot of you guys, have known my son Nate, and he worked there for years. And, COVID, there isn't a pharmacist in the world who would tell you that we had anywhere near the stress of the frontline hospital people who dealt with sick COVID patients every day. But COVID's hard on anybody in healthcare. And we never closed because we didn't have a drive-through. We never shut our doors. So we basically went all the way through COVID with people coming and going. And we worked really long hours. And Nate, I think, just got to the point where he decided that it was time to do something different. So he's off on his next career.
Okay.
But we all made it through COVID okay, but COVID was hard.
Is Pam still work at Walgreens, or is Pam back with you guys?
Pam came back to us.
When did that happen?
So Pam, we really needed help. Pam's been with us back with us 5 years? 6 years? It was after Dad had passed. Because I remember thinking how proud Dad would have been to see Pam and I back working together. Yeah. And it made a huge difference, to have somebody that knew me and I knew her, and, we drew a line on the floor, and you stay on your side and I'll stay on my side. She's still bossy, but it made a huge difference. Yeah.
Hey, would you like to, I'm sorry, I missed your first name, Gary's mom. Ruth, because the thing was, I was going crazy. Gary's mom, well, do you want to add anything about those early years, about what it was like when you guys came here and what it was like getting started?
Well,
Hear that.
I had 3 kids, ages 4, 2, and 3 months. And we had a lot of stairs going up into the drugstore. We lived above it.
Yeah, talking to them.
Oh, hold the mic over closer.
Oh, I have a microphone.
You're doing
Oh, it's okay, just hold it close.
But anyway, yeah, so that was my introduction. And we had to walk down the stairs of our apartment and take a left, and there's a little alleyway there. And you could go into the drugstore from our apartment. You didn't have to go outside. I walked down there one night, opened the door, and the floor was moving. It had black bugs. Oh, cockroaches. They told me, oh, they're okay. They won't bother you. They're water bugs. I said, did they go or I go? Well, I guess I must have had some pull because they did get home, but they fought me. Gary, tell you, his mother and his father, they did not want to get what do you call it, exterminator. No, we got an exterminator. No more cockroaches.
And my grandma Bongi, who worked at the store as a cashier, she loved to clean. And Lord, she hated dirt. So once a year, she would put this bandana on her head. She looked like a Russian babushka. And we would go down the nasty concrete steps into the nasty basement, which was sandstone walls, and a concrete floor, sort of a concrete floor that was mostly heading back to sand.
It was, yeah.
And she would try to clean it. And I'd say, Graham, you can't clean this. It never gets clean because the floor is made of sand and so are the walls. But we would spend 2 or 3 or 4 hours down there trying to sweep the floors and, tidy up the cobwebs. And I'm telling you, that was the spookiest basement ever. That was just...
It really was, because it wasn't just one big room. It had little alleyways and a furnace room with a door. And once, though, we did have to go down there into that lower level because the building was tall. And when we'd have these really high winds, the thing would move. So we'd all get everybody down there. And as long as we were there in a group, everybody was okay. But that was a nasty basement.
And back then, the only bathroom was in that nasty basement. That was before the American with Disabilities Act, so you didn't have to have a first floor bathroom, and we didn't bother. So it wasn't uncommon for a little kid to let mom or dad know that they had to go to the bathroom. And most of the time, you got them about halfway down those creepy steps, and they decided they didn't really have to go to the bathroom. Some of them actually made it all the way to the bottom. When you opened the door, it creaked. And when you turn the light on, I mean, it looked haunted in it. And then most of them decided, no, that's okay, they would wait. Yeah.
Did your family own the building from 58 to 97, or did you ever rent the building during that time?
We rented the building for a short time from Alice and Bill Kunzman, Bill Senior.
They wanted to get out of the business completely, so they wanted us to buy it, which is how that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you guys came out, it had a soda fountain in it, right?
Yeah.
Kunzman's had a soda fountain?
Oh, yeah, all the way across the back, and we had picnic tables,
Yeah.
and the high school kids loved us. They would come in and they would sit at the fountain there, you know, on their stools, and then they would get a cherry Coke, but they really wanted chocolate sauce in their Coke. So here they are, leaning over us, just helping themselves, you know, it didn't matter. We were supposed to love that. They didn't last long. The soda fountain didn't stay. Well, because the big cooler went, the big, you know, we had it for the ice cream and everything. Well, it's so expensive. We decided we weren't going to do that.
And then prepackaged ice cream came around.
Yeah.
So then soda fountains, when prepackaged ice cream was sold at the grocery store, who needed the soda fountain anymore? So then soda fountain sales went down, and then it became just a very large chunk of granite right in the middle of your operation. I don't remember the soda fountain, but I know that Dad always said he basically gave it to somebody just to get it out of there. And I guess it was a chunk of granite like 2 feet wide and
Oh, it was
25
it
feet
was
long.
Yeah.
And when they tried to move it out of there, they put it on a great big set of rollers, and everywhere it went, it crushed every floor tile it passed over. It was just, you know, a massive effort to get it out of there. But, and as a side note, my dad, you know, when Bridgman's opened up, remember Bridgman's on Fish Hatchery Road? You couldn't even take him in there, because if you sat him down and told him he was gonna pay like $8.50 for an ice cream sundae, he would start into the whole story about how he couldn't give ice cream away when it was in his pharmacy. And he would just look around Bridgman's at this, you know, people sitting and spending $8.50 for a hot fudge sundae. So you couldn't take him to Bridgman's. So, you know, and a lot of you guys have stories. You remember Dad, you remember stopping in to buy Sunday papers and,
Do you mind if we ask for people?
yeah,
Does
absolutely.
anyone have any questions or?
Or just recollections.
Questions, recollections of the pharmacy? Here you are.
Well, Gary, I remember that I've been with the pharmacy since 1964.
Wow.
When I came in, I remember Bob Scheinman, and I always would go in to deliver your mail, and I'd pick up a candy bar to sustain me for the mail route. But the main reason I asked for the mic here is I would like you to tell the story about your dad when he was in the service. You told me the story about needles.
Oh.
That would be a good story for people to hear.
Yeah. So my dad was a corpsman in the Navy. And when he went through Corps School, Naval Corps School, he had no idea that the Marines got their corpsmen from the Navy. He just assumed he was going to be a naval corpsman. So at the end of Corps training, they fell outside, you know, and lined up, and they counted off ones and twos. And the ones went with the Marines to be corpsmen, and most of them ended up on the island campaign. He was on the West Coast, stationed at Treasure Island. And luckily, he was, you know, the lucky number and stayed with the Navy stateside. So he worked at the hospital where they took a lot of burn patients off the ships down in Treasure Island. But back in those days, there was no such thing as a disposable needle. So everybody, you had to resharpen needles. So generally speaking, there was 1 or 2 people who were really good at it, and those were the people that sharpened needles. They could put that edge on it. So Dad wasn't regular Navy. He was, I forget what you call it, reserve, right. So every once in a while you get one of these regular Navy guys who were just kind of a pain, you know, because they were going to throw their weight around. So Dad said the way they dealt with that was the guy that sharpened the needle just took the edge off a little bit. And Dad said you'd go to use that needle and it would pop when it went through the skin because you had to push so hard. By the time it finally went in, it popped. And he said those regular Navy guys maybe were pushy, but they weren't dumb. And usually within a couple of days, they got the idea that this wasn't going the way they wanted it to, and they kind of fell into line. So, yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that was strange about the pharmacy was we sold liquor there, but we didn't have a liquor license. We had a medicinal alcohol permit. And honestly, it said in the medicinal alcohol permit about snake bites. So that was all, one of the reasons you could sell liquor was for snake bites. So that was always the joke when somebody came in, we always kept it kind of behind the area, was what kind of snake bit you? Yeah.
What other questions do we have for Gary or his mom Ruth? Or fun memories? Question?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit, just how did COVID affect your business? Other than masks, obviously, but what did it do to pharmacists in general?
Yeah, so basically COVID, pharmacies had been involved in vaccinating for some time. And Sarah could probably tell us, when did we first start doing vaccines?
The late 90s.
Late 90s, okay. So if you'd have told me when I graduated from pharmacy school that I was ever going to give anybody a flu shot, I would have told you that was impossible. That just would never happen. Well, it happened for sure. So we got trained up. So we've been doing flu shots for a long time. And of course, early on in COVID, we're so far down the road now that you sort of forget where we were. But early on in COVID, we didn't know how it spread. There was so much unknown. But people still needed to get prescriptions filled. You still had to get people in and get them back out again. So, it was basically never-ending cans of Lysol, spray, wiping everything down, masks, hand sanitizer, and just stress. So early on, we didn't have any vaccines yet, so it was really just the additional stress of trying to figure out a lot of curbside service. People didn't want to come in, so we would take things out. And, didn't matter if it was cold and raining, you still were going to go out. And so we got through that. And then, of course, once COVID vaccine came out, then, that was a big deal. Now we start vaccinating people. And again, we still brought people in because we really didn't have any other way to do it. And COVID testing, you guys all probably remember some point in time having somebody stick a swab up your nose. Well, that was us, sticking the swabs up the nose. And we did a lot of COVID testing for a while. And eventually, we just had to back away from some of that stuff because the staff just wasn't going to hold up to it. It was just, because you didn't get any more help, you just got more responsibility. So, yeah.
And Gary, I have to show, I have another picture here. When I was talking to Gary about this talk, he said, "Oh, you got to see this." And he took me in the back. Can you explain what this cement block and these floor tiles are?
So basically, when Carl Miller said, we're going to get the old store opened up, so in our warehouse, just behind the pharmacy area, this is the original green block of the old Miller's grocery store. And for those of us old enough to remember being in the old Miller's grocery store, you remember that institutional green block on the wall. And I bet some of you even remember this floor tile. That floor tile is still on the floor in the warehouse. And I'm pretty sure it's probably got asbestos in it. I don't ask, so it's just there. But this was, like if you come in on the right-hand side of our pharmacy, if you go through the back into the warehouse, that was the produce area back there. So yeah, and like I say, when the old store was burning and Carl said we're gonna get it cleaned out, that space was full of Keith Miller. Carl's dad liked to repair player pianos. So there were player pianos in there, and he liked to work on car engines. There was probably a couple of car engines in there. And, Jiffy Quick, they got it cleaned out, and we had a place to live.
How long did it take them after the fire to actually, when you opened up in there, was it months, a year, or was it just weeks?
I think it was 2 months.
Wow.
It was fast. It was fast. I mean, Carl Miller, the Miller family obviously are legendary for what they've done for the city of Roanoke, but what they did for the Bongi family to give us a way to transition on, I mean, it was just everything, and Carl is tireless. I mean, he just never sleeps. So when he said he was going to get it done, then you just knew it was going to get done. And for my sister Pam, for her, that was, okay, I'm gonna have a place to go, because Carl told me I will. So then, what do I do to bridge? You know, and that's when we did all the working from her house and delivering scripts.
Yeah, Art, one thing?
I guess, a couple of things. A couple of things. When I would go to the pharmacy often, I would buy my flash bulbs there, because they carried flash bulbs.
On Christmas?
No, I don't think I did it on Christmas. I may have. But the other thing was, if your television wasn't working, you'd take the back off and you'd pull all the tubes out, and you'd go down to the pharmacy and test your television tubes.
Forgot about the tube tester, yeah. Seriously, you know, there wasn't any solid state circuitry in TVs, it was all tubes. So if your TV failed, then everybody just took the back off and you looked at the most suspicious looking tube, and people would come in the door with a handful of tubes, and the tester had the kind of socket that the tube took on the top. And you would plug your tube in there, and it would tell you if it was a dead tube. And if so, the front of the door was always open. You would just reach in there and find the tube that you needed amongst all the other tubes, then you would come pay for it. I forgot about the tube tester. Yeah. I don't think that survived the fire either.
Oh, Sarah's got some. Here you go, Sarah.
Well, Gary's too modest to share this, but I will share it. Gary is a recipient, he's part of Wisconsin Pharmacy history as well. He is a recipient of the Bowl of Hygeia Award, which he received in 2012, so 10 years ago. That's hard to believe. We were talking about my daughter's 10. The Bowl of Hygeia Award is a very special award because it's not just about recognizing the caliber of pharmacist that you are, but the involvement that you have in your community and the service that you provide to your community. It's part of a national awards program, and the big Bowl of Hygeia sits in on the National Mall in the American Pharmacists Association building, and that award's been around since 1958. So Gary has connected to that award as part of Wisconsin pharmacy history too.
So, short story, we go up to the Dells to do the award, and I'm nervous. I wrote the speech on the way up in the car, because I don't do anything until the last minute. So, I don't know what all's going on at this award banquet, so I'm sitting at a table like, you know, with Mom and some other folks, and I get up to take my suit coat off because I'm getting hot. And at that point in time, the entire group stood up. And I'm thinking, it's okay, people, I'm just taking my coat off. So unbeknownst to me, all of the leadership of the Pharmacy Society of Wisconsin had come in behind me, and they were walking towards the dais up there. But I didn't see them because I'm standing in front of them, and I'm thinking, why is everybody standing up? I'm just taking my coat off. Yeah. And quite honestly, I'm the only person that's ever gotten that award for being a travel agent for a dog. We helped an elderly lady get to Australia to reconnect with her family. And what was holding up the show was the fact that her little dog, her Bichon, Australia has no rabies. And you can't bring any animal into Australia until it's cleared for rabies. And the chain of evidence has to be unbroken. And so you have a window of time to get the dog tested at a specific place that does this kind of testing. Then the clock starts ticking. And if you can't get the airline booked, and then there had to be a spot for Fritzy in Australia to go into quarantine once he arrived. So we sent Faye off. We got her to the airport and on her way. And we kept Fritzy until we could get all of the lab work done and get the chain of command done, or control, and finally took Fritzy down to the O'Hare Airport to get him on a plane to Australia. And I told that story to a pharmacist that worked at the pharmacy school, and she apparently was struck by that, so she nominated me. And that's how, so I ended up getting the Bowl of Hygeia Award. And before I got my award, people got other awards in front of me. They're standing up there talking about, I cured cancer, and, you know, all this, it just goes on and on and on, and I'm like, I finally get up there and I looked at the president and I said, I bet you're even more surprised than I am that I'm here. Because I got an award for shipping a dog to Australia.
All right. Well, geez. Gary and Ruth, thank you so much for coming and being here yesterday. This was amazing. And
Thank you for having me.
Did you have fun?
Thank you.
Gary, did you
Yeah,
enjoy?
I did, and
Yes.
thank you again, because I know a lot of you have known you for years, Mr. and Ms. Nemec I've known since he was my teacher, 1,000 years ago. But because the city of Verona has backed us, that's the reason we're still here today.
Thanks so much.